Greetings and welcome to part 2 of our look at first century burials, and today we're going to focus in on two case studies of very famous ossuaries. Our first case study is that of the Caiaphas tomb. And back in 1990 there was some construction work going on in the outskirts of Jerusalem, just south of Jerusalem, in what's known as the Peace Forest, and a bulldozer hit something. And they discovered that it was the top of a tomb. So they stopped all construction. They called in the Israel Antiquities Authority, and they started to investigate, and they found that they had a first century tomb. Well, of course, Caiaphas seems to refer to Joseph Caiaphas, who was the high priest in Jerusalem from AD 18 until 37. And this historical character is mentioned by the Jewish historian Josephus. He's also mentioned in the Gospels. He was appointed by the Roman prefect Gratus just immediately before Pontius Pilate became prefect. And the Gospels present Caiaphas as kind of a nemesis to Jesus. In Matthew 25, Caiaphas, as the high priest, is interrogating Jesus and ultimately charges him with the sin and the crime of blasphemy. Well, when they began to clear out the tomb, what they discovered was a fairly large complex in which there were 4 niches or extensions from the tomb. And in these niches, they found wonderful things. In fact, within the tomb, they found a total of 12 different ossuaries. Now, among the 12 ossuaries, they found one that was especially beautiful and ornately carved. And when they opened it up, they found bones. Bones from 2 infants, 2 teenage boys, 1 adult woman, and 1 man who was judged from the bones to be about 60 years old. Besides being a beautifully carved and exquisitely, ornately decorated ossuary, they also found an inscription on it. And here we see the inscription. You can see the Hebrew letters spelling out Yosef, Bar, Kapha, that is, Joseph, the son of Kapha. Kapha is a short form of the surname Caiaphas. Well, as if that weren't enough, on the back side of the ossuary, there's another inscription, which appears to have been done by a different hand than the first inscription. And in fact, the spelling of the family name, surname, Caiapha, is slightly different than the inscription on the side of the ossuary. So once again, we get evidence here that when the bones are placed in the ossuary, the family members are there, and it may be different family members who are making an inscription on the box. And here, once again, the inscription reads Yosef Bar Kaifa. Joseph, the son of Caiaphas. Well, what do we have here with the Caiaphas ossuary? Well, it's very interesting to say the least. And one can ask the question, are the bones of the 60-year-old man found in the ossuary those of the actual high priest, Caiaphas, who's mentioned in the New Testament, who's mentioned by the Jewish historian Josephus? Well, it's a bit circumstantial, to say the least. It would have been nice if the inscription had said Caiaphas, the high priest, but it doesn't. And there may have been more than one Joseph Caiaphas in the first century. However, beyond any doubt, this is a fabulous discovery of a beautifully created ossuary that is just an exquisite piece of work and artisanship in the first century. Our second case study is that of the James ossuary. Now, this particular artifact came out of a private collection of an Israeli citizen by the name of Obed Golan. And from the very start, there was immense controversy over this ossuary, whether it was a fake or whether it was authentic. Because on the ossuary, there's an inscription in Aramaic letters. The inscription is about 7.5 inches long, contained 20 letters, and when one deciphers the script, the inscription reads, James, the son of Joseph, the brother of Jesus. Well, if you're at all familiar with the gospel stories, these names ring a bell. And here we have Jesus, who is the son of Joseph, who has a brother by the name of James. Are these the very people, the very characters out of the pages of the New Testament? This is a real soap opera. There's great debate over this ossuary. Is it real or is it not? After all, this ossuary was not found in an archaeological context like that of the Caiaphas ossuary. This, in fact, came out of the back room of an antiquities shop. Although you have to recognize that this isn't all that unusual, and many of the most interesting antiquities that come to light oftentimes come to light through the black market and through sources other than an actual archaeological context. So as you can imagine, there was debate over this ossuary for a long period of time, and everybody got involved. Scholars were on both sides of the issue, some saying it's real, some saying that it's a fake. There were many scientific tests done to the ossuary. And in fact, the Ministry of National Infrastructures of Israel and the Geological Society of Israel examined this ossuary very closely in order to try to see if it were a fake. And in fact, their finding was, in the end, that there was no evidence that might detract from the authenticity of this ossuary. That is, the inscription seems to be that of a 1st century text. The dirt found in the ossuary inscription does not seem to have been artificially placed there to age the ossuary. All the signs are that this, in fact, was a real artifact from the 1st century. Now, to be sure, there are still many doubters as to the authenticity of this ossuary. After all, the inscription is just too perfect, they say. The inscription is just too sensational. And they'll also point to the last part of the inscription, that phrase, the brother of Jesus, which some of the critics say appears to be written in a different hand. Now, in fact, a number of ossuaries do have evidence that the writing is done by at least 2 different hands. We saw that in the Caiaphas ossuary. And nobody ever disputed the authenticity of those ossuaries before the discovery of the James ossuary. Let's take a look at this example of 2 different hands writing the same name on an ossuary. Here we have the writing from the ossuary in Ramani's catalog, number 370. And you can see it's the name Yehuda, and it clearly is the writing of 2 different individuals. One argument that the inscription is a fake is the fact that in this inscription, the end part, brother of Jesus, you can see the letters getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And some say this is evidence that this portion was added at a later time. However, when one looks at the entire corpus of inscriptions, one finds a number of examples where this is exactly the case, where the letters fade off and get smaller and smaller and smaller. So for instance, here we have Ramani's catalog number 27 inscription, Shalom, the daughter of Leatzar. And you can see the right side, or the beginning of the inscription. Remember, Hebrew, Aramaic are written from right to left. You can see the letters are larger. And the inscription, as it goes farther on, the letters seem to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, is this evidence that this portion was added at a later time? Well, Hardly. I don't think that's the case at all. Here's another example of an inscription where the letters get smaller and smaller. Consider this one. This is Romani's catalog number 893, and the inscription is Yosef, the son of Hananiah, the scribe. And if you look at the beginning of the inscription on the right, you can see the letters are quite large, and as the inscription goes on, the letters seem to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, nobody has argued that this is a fake and that the later portion of this inscription was added because obviously the letters are a different size. This seems to be a phenomena that is common to the inscriptions of first century ossuaries. Well, as you can see, the James ossuary is a very interesting piece. Well, what are some conclusions that we can draw, some general statements that we might be able to make about this fascinating piece? First of all, I think we can say the ossuary may or may not be genuine. Even if it is genuine, this piece should not function as a stimulus to faith. Our faith is not founded upon the proof of an antiquity. And even if it's genuine, it may not refer to the James and the Jesus of the New Testament. Remember, these are very common given names in first century Palestine. But in the end, of course, what we have here are two case studies of very interesting pieces. The Caiaphas ossuary with an inscription that mentions the high priest, very ornately done, very expensive piece. And then the James ossuary with this sensational inscription mentioning James, possibly the brother of Jesus. Well, what we've seen in these two case studies are very extreme examples. Remember that hundreds of ossuaries have been found, and they give us a great window of insight into the burial practices, sociological status of people in the first century.